2 weeks ago, Gabriel killed himself. Over the years at the mental ward, he had multiple suicide attempts. It was his last one that unfortunately succeeded. By the time it happened, I hadn't been living in my old neighborhood for several years. I was one of the few lucky kids who had received a scholarship because of my outstanding academical performance. It allowed me to enroll in college and to leave my old neighborhood behind. I never looked back. It was Mom who called me out of the blue and told me that my old childhood friend Gabriel had killed himself. It might sound harsh, but considering his condition, I always knew it was only a matter of time until something like this would happen. Still, as much as I told myself this, didn't help one bit. I was devastated. I decided instantly to make the lengthy trip back home and attend the funeral. I owed him at least that much. In the years that followed our descent, I'd blamed myself for what had happened back then. If not for my stupid obsession with an urban legend, he'd still be alive. The funeral wasn't big. The only people attending were his parents and a few relatives. None of them gave me much attention and they probably didn't even recognize me. Other than me, 2 other young men attended the funeral. Both of them seemed as lost there as I was. One was an awkward young man wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit. He was nervous and seemed fidgety. When he smiled at me shyly, his head hanging low, I recognized him. "David?" I asked as I walked over to him. He stared at me before he too recognized me and extended a hand to greet me. "Felipe," he exclaimed, slurring part of it so it came out more like a Felipe. I could tell right away that he was far from sober. The other guy watched us from afar. He was a young, muscular man who carried himself pretty confidently. When he made his way over to us, I finally recognized him. My jaw dropped. It was Fat Tom, but he wasn't fat at all anymore. "Tomás, is that you? Holy shit, what happened to you?" I greeted him and gave him a huge hug. "Felipe, good to see you. How long's it been?" "Too long," I answered, smiling. He nodded and for a moment his eyes wandered to the grave. Not the nicest reunion. David and I both agreed. "Well, how about drinks?" Tomás asked. After we'd given our condolences to Gabriel's parents, Tomás led us to a small local bar not too far from our old neighborhood. Tomás greeted the owner and the man instantly prepared a beer for each of us. After a toast, we started to chit-chat and talk about how life was treating us. I found out that David's father had drunk himself to death when David was 15 years old. After that, he gave up on school and started to work at one of the local factories. I watched with a sullen look at how greedily he gulped down culture for a bit and talked about the times when our little group had been inseparable. It all changed after what happened to Gabriel. We stayed friends, but it was a reluctant friendship, and over the years we slowly drifted apart. When I asked them about Samuel, their faces turned sour. As he grew older and after I moved away, he hung out with Andres and his group. He gave up on school and followed in his brother's footsteps. The two of them talked to him occasionally, but then, one day, he was just gone. No one knows what happened to him and they both told me he'd probably moved on. I nodded, but I knew you don't just move on in a neighborhood like ours. We were all quiet for a bit, and after I'd taken another sip of my beer, I couldn't help but stare at Tomás again. I couldn't believe how much he had changed. In my memory, he was still the fat kid in our group, and here he was in much better shape than me. "Something the matter?" he asked with a grin on his face. "It's the matter?" he asked with a grin on his face. "It's just that," I started but couldn't find the right words to finish. "That little Tom isn't fat anymore?" I smiled at him and nodded. "Can't use that nickname anymore," he added. All 3 of us laughed. "Terrible what happened to Gabriel," David suddenly said and brought us back to reality. "Yeah," I said. "They should have done so much more back then," I continued. "Like what?" Tomás asked. "Well, the damn cops could have sent more people down there. They could have done so much more." Tomás laughed again. Felipe, none of the cops here give a shit about a kid going missing," he said and took another sip of his beer before he continued. "Everybody knew the entire thing was bullshit. The perpetrator, the way they handled it, and what they had said had happened." "True," David said, nodding. "I wonder what we saw that day," I thought out loud. "Chased us?" Tomás asked. I nodded. Yeah, lizard man. Tomás laughed. You're still using that name, Felipe? Well, what else should I call it? He shrugged. No clue. At this point, David got up from his seat. He quickly downed the rest of his beer before he looked at us with an awkward smile. Well, sorry guys, but... He slurred, looking at the clock. The wife's gonna be mad if I'm not home and... It's fine, David, I said. Tomás nodded. We both gave him a hug that he awkwardly returned. He gave us another nod before he made his way to the door. We could both see he wasn't able to walk in a straight line anymore. Neither of us said a word though. It wasn't ours to judge him. After we'd gotten ourselves another beer, Tomás told me that Gabriel's story wasn't that uncommon. Many cases are never solved and are swept under the carpet. How do you know? I started but was cut off when he put a police badge on the table. For a moment, guess no one suspected Fat Tom to join the force, right? He said with an even bigger grin. Hey, I didn't mean what I said before, you know. He waved his hand, showing me it was fine. Don't worry about it, you weren't wrong. How'd you end up becoming a cop? I never remembered him talking about it. He'd always talked about becoming a baker, a chef, or a restaurant owner. Anything related to food, basically. Well, after the entire thing with Gabriel, I couldn't help but blame myself, you know, Felipe? I nodded in agreement. I had my own inner demons because of it. I couldn't forget about it and go on living like it never happened, or, well, move away as you did. His tone had become reproachful, but I shrugged it off. He had a point. I wanted to do something, you know, he pressed out. Yeah, I get what you mean. For a moment he eyed me to see if I was just saying it, but then he nodded. Tell you what, they never got the guy who did it. As I said, it was all bullshit. Recently though, another young girl was found no older than 14. The same happened to her. Dragged off into those damn tunnels, abused and brutally raped. Only for her it was too late. I stayed quiet, but I could see that Tomás was getting angry. That shit happens all the fucking time. He broke up, shook his head and ordered himself another beer. Time went on. We kept talking, and as it got later, beer was replaced by shots. I don't remember how we came up with the idea, but we made plans to go down into the sewers to find Lizard Man again. When I woke up the next morning, my head was pounding and I felt like total shit. I didn't even remember how I'd made it back to my parents' place, but I was relieved that I still had all my belongings with me. After I'd flushed down a couple of painkillers, the pounding in my head subsided. I'd barely made myself some coffee when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but when I answered it, I heard a familiar voice. Is the plan fill up, Felipe? It took me a few moments to realize that the voice belonged to Tomás, and a few more to remember what he'd been talking about. I heard the determination in his voice, and finally, my curiosity got the better of me. Yeah, I'm in, I heard myself say. We met up soon after at our old meeting place. It felt nostalgic to be back there. As I scanned the area, I could almost see my friends in front of me. I was surprised when I saw a police cop pull in, and more so when Tomás waved me over. Together the two of us set out to the pipe exit at the riverbank. I felt a shiver running down my spine when I saw it. This time we came prepared. Tomás had gotten his hand on a map of the old sewers, 2 police flashlights, and a handful of other things, including a gun. As we stood in front of the entry, he handed me a flashlight and made eye contact with me. For a moment I wasn't so sure anymore, but then I thought about Gabriel and nodded. The smell hit us right away. It was far worse than I remembered. Jesus, I cursed and put my hand over my nose. Tomás walked in front of me completely unfazed by it. How can you just... with the smell? I've smelled worse, he answered, shrugging. I didn't ask what he meant. Ever since I'd moved away, I'd heard all the horror stories about my neighborhood. Stories about rape and murder, poverty and prostitution, as well as child crime. I guess when you're growing up in the middle of it, you don't see things for what they really are. As we ventured deeper into the old sewers, a sense of déjà vu washed over me. The daylight grew weaker and weaker before it vanished completely. I felt the hair on my arms stand up as we turned on our flashlights. Step by step, the memory of over a decade ago came back to me. It's surprising how deep certain images can be buried inside your mind. Tomás showed me the map and pointed at a specific area. Well, that's where we are right now. It's the first couple of tunnels they dug out in the day. If that bastard lived here back then, chances are he's still around now. As we made our way through the tunnels, the sound of our footsteps echoed through the darkness ahead of us. The only other sound was the familiar noise of rodents. They were always close by, but we never saw any of them. It felt almost like I was 11 years old again as I hurried after Tomás. We'd been down there for what must have been 2 hours when Tomás cursed. Fucking hell, there's no hint of anything. What if we continue over there? He turned to look at me. We've been through the entire sewers twice already. Wait, are you serious? He nodded and held up the map that was now covered in dots and marks. Marked every little turn and dead end. Twice. So that's it then? Tomás spit on the ground. He illuminated the area around us one last time before he nodded. Guess I should have known better, he mumbled to himself. On our way back, I started doing the same thing he'd done. I illuminated every nook and cranny of the surrounding area. At one point I noticed a small ditch to our right where the water was dripping down somewhere. Hey, what's that? I asked and put my hand on Tomás' shoulder. The moment he saw it, he hurried over. I'd thought it was nothing more than a small hole, but it turned out to be some sort of tunnel. When we illuminated it, we saw that there was a passageway. Tomás checked the map to see if there had been a tunnel here once that had collapsed, but he couldn't find anything on the map. Might be nothing. He started, but I nodded right away. I knew what he was about to say. We almost had to crouch as we followed the small tunnel downward. It soon grew wider and we realized we were in a natural cave of sorts. I carefully took one step at a time and listened to the surrounding sounds. What in the... I started, but Tomás turned around and put a finger over his mouth. Then he walked into the darkness ahead of me. It wasn't long before we found the first signs of human activity. There were some old clothes here, a fireplace there, and I even saw some old dirty books on the ground next to it. As we illuminated the surrounding area, we soon discovered a tent propped up against one of the cave's walls. Next to it we found stacks of food, much of it still in edible condition. Tomás nodded at me and got out his gun. Someone was living down here and I knew he wouldn't take any chances. He moved his flashlight around, carefully scanning the area. When he illuminated a figure standing ahead of me, I gasped. I in and a clawed hand instantly. Don't move! Tomás yelled at the figure, pointing his gun at it. To my surprise, I saw it nod and raise his hands. I was completely perplexed. I recognized every last detail about Lizardman and the holy shit escaped my mouth. Once I got a closer look though, I noticed the hanging shoulders, the deep wrinkles, and the bushes of grey hair that sprouted from the head. Tired eyes stared at us and looked first at Tomás, then at me, and then back at Tomás and the gun in his hand. Suddenly I heard a voice. You can put the gun down, boy, you're not in danger. I jerked the flashlight around, trying to find the speaker. Then it hit me. The voice was coming from Lizardman himself. Not going to do anything to you boys. The fuck you are, freak? Tomás asked. The creature in front of us laughed, at least if you can call it that. It was a sickly, thin sound that reminded you more of a whistle. You're right, I'm exactly that, a freak, he went on. Still a human being, so even if it's hard to believe looking like this. Why the hell are you looking like that? I burst out. Lizardman explained that he was suffering from a rare skin condition. It starts as a rash, but soon it transforms your skin into something resembling leather and scales. I couldn't believe it. The creature I'd thought of as Lizardman for so long was a human being just like us. Tomás mumbled something before he lowered his gun, but kept it in his hand at the ready. The weird old man in front of us seemed to relax a bit. I'm not sure how much of his story was true, but he went on to tell us how he was ostracized by society. Used to be normal, looked just like you, had a job, friends, a family, a home, all that. Once this started at his face. Got kicked out of work, said I was contagious. After that things went down quickly. My friends ignored me, found no other job, and lost my home. That's how I ended up in the streets, but that made it even worse. I got beaten up, was regarded as a monster, and called me Leatherface, Lizard Man, and God knows what else. As I listened, I started to feel sorry for the old man standing in front of us. Was in my 40s when I went down here. Had enough of everyone up there and no desire to go back anymore. Must have been down here a good 20 years by now. More than enough time to get used to this life, he said, laughing. How do you know how long it's been? Tomás asked. Well, boy, I can't get no foot down here. I have to get up every once in a while, and there's newspapers in the trash and at the garbage dumps. Why don't you go back up? There's probably a cure you could... He raised a hand to stop me. There's nothing up there for me anymore. No friends, no family. Most important though, he began, and I could see his face turn sad. There's no compassion up there. He shook his head. Down here, at least I'm all by myself. Tomás had gotten impatient and he'd given me a few angry side glances as I kept talking to the old man. As soon as he finished this time, it was Tomás who spoke up. Alright, old man, I've got a few questions for you. Lizardman gave him a questioning look. There were 5 of us, 11 years old. We came down here one day about a decade ago. Saw you and one of our friends got lost, or was taken. Instead of answering, Lizardman laughed. I might live down here alone, boy, but you'd be surprised how many people come down here. There's no way I'd surprised how many people come down here. There's no way I'd remembered all of them. At first I thought that was all he was about to say, but then something seemed to come to his mind. A decade ago, you said? Well, back then it wasn't just me who was down here. There was this group of other guys. Sure, they looked the part, but they weren't homeless. They were here for an entirely different reason. Trucks, Tomás whispered knowingly. Come and sing back in the day. No one cared about a few crazed hobos living down here. Lizardman nodded. Used to be a dangerous place down here, boy. I'm sure you'll remember the group of kids. Tomás started, and as he continued his voice became strained. Especially if you chased them. Never chased no one, boy. Most who see me ran away. Surprised you two didn't do the same thing. What happened to our friend, old man? Tomás asked again, starting to get angry. He got lost down here right after he ran away from you, as you call it. The old man's eyes grew wide. Don't tell me, he started. I looked up. So you were that group, he said finally. What are you talking about? I cut in and landed another angry glance from Tomás. Still remember it, was in the tunnels, planning to go up, get some food. Noticed that those truck guys were searching for someone. Ran into your kids later and knew they were after you. I wanted to warn you, tell you to get out, but you ran away. Couldn't blame you really. Tried to calm you down, to help you, call you out, but you wouldn't listen. Tried my best to drive you to the exit, but then one of you rushed off into the side tunnels. And what did you do to him? Tomás asked, raising his gun once more. Couldn't do a damn thing. Ran after him, but he was too fast, and before you know it, he stumbled right into them. I spoke up and told Lizardman what had happened to Gabriel and why we'd come down here. He shook his head and then looked straight at me. Is that the world you want me to go back to, boy? One in which kids are abused and mutilated? After a while I couldn't look at him anymore. It was at this point that Tomás had wandered off and had a look at Lizardman's belongings. He rummaged through the heap of clothes before he pulled something out from it. Care to tell me what those are, old man? At first I didn't understand what Tomás was doing, but then he illuminated a piece of woman's underwear. What do you think those are, boy? It's rags, things I found at the garbage dump and took down here. Tomás pointed his gun at the man. I remembered what he told me last night about the adolescent girl who'd give the old man a hard look. I expected Lizardman to be scared or to make excuses. Instead, he burst out laughing again. "Oh, of course it's me, right? Who else but old Lizardman could have done it? Crawled from the sewers in the middle of the night and tracked the girl down here, that's what you're thinking, right, boy?" Tomás didn't say a thing but kept his gun pointed at the man. "Don't make a fool of yourself, boy. Those are woman's things, right? You think I did something to a woman?" He laughed once more. "Couldn't have been me. You wanna see proof? You wanna see it?" The old man was angry now, and a second later he pushed one of his hands below the rags covering his body. At this moment Tomás pulled the trigger. I was standing there in complete and utter shock, pressing my hands to my ears as the sound of the gunshot reverberated through the cave. "Why'd you do that?" I screamed in my ears. It took some time until I could understand his words. He might have had a gun. I stared over at Lizardman and then stepped up to his body. For a moment the thought he might be an actual monster and would come back to life crossed my mind. Nothing like that happened. The old man was dead. I illuminated the body with the flashlight, trying to see if he'd been carrying a gun. Only when I moved the rags aside did I realize what he'd wanted to show us. It was his crutch. The entire area was nothing but overgrown scar tissue, leathery skin and scales. "Holy fucking shit!" I pressed out. I turned to Tomás. "There's no way he could have raped the girl," I called out to him. That's when the full irony of the name Lizardman hit me. The man we'd called that for all those years didn't even have a tail. "You didn't know, it's not your fault. Oh, it's not your fault," I said as Tomás walked up to me. He said nothing. Instead he shrugged and turned away. "Whatever, no one needs to know about that." "Wait, what do you mean?" "All that people need to know is that he did the girl so we can close the damned case." I stared at him. My mouth opened, but then I closed it again. There wasn't a single thing I could say to that. We left the sewer soon after. The moment we were out, Tomás called the station and informed them he'd found the suspect. Me? I simply walked away without saying so much as a word to him. There was never an article about the case or Lizardman. The entire thing was swept under the carpet. It was the same as what happened with Gabriel's case back then. If I wouldn't have met Tomás, I'd never even heard about the case or that it was now closed. That same night when I couldn't sleep, I sat at the room and stared at my old neighborhood. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened today. Finally, I got out my phone and dialed Tomás' number. "What do you want, Felipe? It's late." "The fuck was that today?" I heard him sigh, but he gave me no answer. "I know the truth, Tomás. The old guy was innocent." Once more he said nothing. "Well, what if I come down to the station tomorrow, Tomás?" I confronted him. "And then what?" he finally asked. "So we can reopen the case? So the parents know that the guy who did that to their little girl is still out there? So we can continue to search for someone we won't find? No one gives a shit about the case anyways. Not the girl, not their parents, not Lizardman. If you go to the station tomorrow, you know what they'll do? Not a damn thing, that's it. What the hell do you even know, Felipe?" "I know that you shot and..." I started, but Tomás cut me off right away. "You don't know a damn thing, Felipe. No one gives a shit here." Then his rage went away, and I heard him continue in a quivering voice. "You have to realize, Felipe, no one gives a shit about any of this. Not the people, not the case. No one, not here." With that, he hung up and the phone was quiet. I told myself to go to the station and tell him the truth about what Tomás had done. But I never went. It wasn't because I had my doubts about Lizardman's story. It wasn't because of what Tomás had told me. No, it was the way his voice had sounded. Quivering, broken, defeated. And because I knew why he'd hung up so quickly.